Hello and welcome to the Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. I am your host, Blaine Bartlett. Today we have got a fascinating guest, and I say that every time, but this time I really mean it. Got a fascinating guest in this in the form of a fellow by the name of Doug Brown, and Doug is probably one of the exemplars, if you will, I think, of what it means to be number one, a number one salesperson on the planet. And I didn't mean, I'm going to use sales here in a very interesting way. Um, Everything in life is got a sales component to it, and I'm selling my dreams to people all the time. I'm selling my ideas to people all the time. I'm selling my products and services to people all the time. Unfortunately, most people don't know how to do that particularly well. And I was on a conversation the other day with a fellow, and we were talking about something along this ilk. And the analogy was, people go into a hardware store to buy a drill, and the salesperson tries to sell them a 1/4-inch bit, and they forget that what they're actually trying to what the client is trying to buy is a 1/4-inch hole. The bit is the way to get to the hole. And when you're selling, that's what you want to pay attention. What's the hole that the client wants? And that hole takes all kinds of different forms. Doug Brown is the CEO of CEO Sales Strategies, and more importantly, here he's the creator of a program called the Top 1% Academy, and that's what I want to talk about in this, because I think you as a listener are going to walk away from this going, "Oh my God, this is stuff that I can't not pay attention to, because it will transform the way I do my life, live my life, and actually enjoy my life at the end of the day." Just a little bit of real quick background. Doug, just to kind of give you a CV, and I'm not going to go into everything that he's got on his CV here because it's pretty impressive, but he was the president of sales and training for Tony Robbins, for Chet Holmes, and for Russ Whitney. And in those positions, I mean, just as an example here, he took Tony's sales force, and I'm going to butcher this statistic just a bit here, but the sales numbers, the numerical bump here was from a 17.8 to a 43% increase in sales. Is that a fairly accurate way of describing that, Doug? Did I butcher that?
Yeah, that was the close rate, Blaine. So we took the close rate on the
close rate. That's the one I was missing. Yeah. So I want to just welcome Doug Brown to the show. Doug, thanks for being here, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Oh, I am too, and thank you for having me. I'm very grateful.
Well, both of us will fit in that shoe, and we'll walk down this path together with gratitude. The question I typically ask, and we had a little bit of a conversation before we went live with the show, but the question I typically ask at the beginning here is, when you hear the term the soul of business, what does that bring up? And I want to explore that from a different angle after you answer the question, because there's a back door to this that I think is going to be worthy of some sort of an exploration and conversation. So I'll just lead with the question: when you hear the soul of business, what does that evoke? What does that bring up?
Yeah, well, for me, when I heard that, when I was listening to your podcast, the first thing I thought of was, when somebody starts a company or starts a business, they're really not necessarily, I mean, they all want money because that's, a driving force, but a lot of times they're starting it more for a mission in some capacity. And that's what the soul of the business to me is that mission-driven thought process. And then usually somewhere for most people along the way, that soul starts to waver because of the pressures that come along with the business. And sometimes it wavers back and forth, right? Yeah, because we all continue to strive to be there. But sometimes just out of necessity, it's like, oh, well, we thought this was the avenue we were supposed to go down, but the audience actually says, no, this is the buying audience, and this is the avenue you really should go down. Yeah. So sometimes the soul kind of changes, but to me, it's that mission, Blaine, that people start out with, and they want to achieve something beyond that financial gain that they're hoping to get, because they do want that. But most of them are trying to help somebody do something, or help society, or help the world, or whatever it is that they come up with this creative idea and they go, wow, this solves this problem. And that to me is the soul.
Yeah. And then, to the point that you made a little bit right at the beginning here, the money becomes very attractive. Success becomes very seductive. However
Oh
we
yeah.
end up defining that. And it's a siren song. It really is. It's kind of it moves us away from what we got into this thing for in the first place. And, the image that comes to mind is Jason, lashing himself to the mast of the boat as they, sail past the sirens in Greek mythology here. If I'm not
Mm-hmm.
paying attention, if I don't find a way to tether myself to that soul, it becomes really easy to be seduced, and actually, in many cases, end up on the shoals of some very interesting wreckage if I'm not careful. And I've been with a number of companies. I mean, Nokia comes to mind for me with that. They took their eye off the ball, I think, in a very significant way, and had their lunch handed to them. Now they're rising again.
Yeah.
I mean, Nokia's 120 years old, I think, 130 years old as a company. So they've crashed and burned a couple of different times. But one of the things here, you've been associated with some very large organizations, and you've sold some fascinating things. I mean, you've sold music equipment to Aerosmith, to Boston, to the Eagles. I mean, there's not a whole lot of folks
Yeah.
that can claim that one. What has compelled you, and I'll put it this way: what's brought you back to the soul of business? Because you got real successful, and by your own admission, when we were talking again before we went live here, you got seduced in one sense, and I don't mean this in a pejorative at all. It happens all the time. But money became kind of the glitter out there, and it's kind of squirrel. Let's go. What's brought you back?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so, and I think you bring up a really good point, that money did have me. Right. And so my money became my identity. And it was actually when I was working with Tony Robbins and Chet Holmes. I remember this. I had my house paid off. Now I was in my early 40s, like 41-ish. I had the house paid off. I had cars paid off. Everybody's healthy in the family, making $500,000 a year minimum. Had $500,000 in the bank. And back then that's worth more than $500,000 today, right?
Yep.
That was 20 years ago. And I remember never being so scared in my life. And I was like, what is wrong with me? I lived outside of Houston, Texas at that time. And I remember walking around just like fearful. And I walked into the kitchen one day and I said to my wife, I said, there's something wrong with me. Like everything in my life is going great, but I feel like I don't even know who I am anymore. Like, and I said, we're in this position and what's wrong with me? That's what I was asking the question. Right. And she said to me, nothing wrong with you. I said, no, I feel like I've kind of become disconnected. I'm kind of focused on not the right things. Now, one of the reasons that I always sold and was always very successful in sales playing is because I care.
Yeah.
And I'm the guy who teaches, look, if it's not right for somebody else, disengage. But when you're running 166 people in an organization, when you're running all of these things and you've got all this pressure all over you to do that, sometimes you start to care a little bit less. And that was what was happening to me. And I remember saying to her, I'm going to go down into the really rough parts of Houston, Texas. I'm going to walk around the neighborhoods. I'm going to tell people, I got a lovely wife, lovely family. Everybody's healthy. I got the home. I've got the money. I've got the cars. I've got, semi-fame. I've got all this stuff. And I'm so unhappy. And I said, I wonder how long it's going to take somebody to beat me up. Right. Because I knew I was in a position that most people wanted to be, but at the same time, I was sort of losing my connection with myself. And I think that goes back to the soul. Why was I there in the first place? It was to really help people. Right. So money can be a great driver and a motivator, but it also can bring us to a place where we start to identify that as our identity. That gets us into trouble because we start to make decisions that aren't us. And, so that's kind of what happened. And you know what was the original question you asked me? Because I diverted off of that into that place for you.
No, I mean, you're spot on with this. We get attracted with something, money being probably the prime example of this. When we start making decisions and choices predicated on the value of that rather than the value of what I'm calling the soul. I mean, what got me into the business in the first place? Whatever that may have been.
Right.
And for you, it was, I care about people. I want to see people succeed. Not that ever necessarily disappeared, but it wasn't the prime operative in your life. So there was something, a catalyst, and you just you basically just landed on it here, that started your migration back to that source, that soul.
And the cool part about it, I think, Blaine, is when I reconnected with that, and Russ Whitney was actually very instrumental in helping me reconnect that.
Yeah.
And Russ wrote a book called The Inner Voice.
Yep.
And Russ wanted to bring this out as a product set, so I was the guy helping him do that. And when I started realizing what was going on, I reconnected back. I didn't deviate a lot. That's the whole thing. It wasn't like I went from being a really nice guy who really cared to a guy who just didn't care anymore. Not that. Yeah. It was just like I was off, 5 or 10%, but we can internally feel that. And I know that now. The moment I started reconnecting, the interesting thing is my income went up anyways, right? So it was kind of like, all right, so now I'm earning 7 figures a year and I'm enjoying my life and I'm enjoying what I'm doing on a regular basis. And that just breeds more success. And I think, like you brought up Tony Robbins, I think part of Tony's success is, I've heard Tony talk and he cared about people, when he started out, that's, of course, he's become Tony Robbins, but that was kind of his driving force, other than getting out of his Volkswagen that he was living in or whatever in the beginning, right? Yeah. That type of thing.
Yep.
And, I don't know how Tony fit into a Volkswagen. That's the man's, he's a huge stature.
Get his hands in the Volkswagen.
Yeah, exactly. First time I shook his hand, my hand got swallowed up by his hand, right? I was like, my God, this man is gigantic and a powerful man. So it's but as soon as that reconnection point started, everything started getting better in my life. And it reminded me about a bunch of companies that I had worked with. In particular, I remember a gentleman, he had a company, it was $200 million. It was like 205. What's $5 million at that point, right? And he was so unhappy. The business had him.
Yeah.
And so we got talking about it originally and, why'd you start the business? And he went back to this. The man was pretty near into tears and he was just at the end where he was like, I'm just going to cut this business. I'm done, But what he ended up doing is he ended up going back to that roots and scaling it back. And he actually cut the revenue significantly in the company. It went from 205 down to 60 million, which a lot of people will be like, why, my gosh, why would he do that?
Yeah.
He was like one of the happiest men on the planet. And he worked 1/5 the time. The company ran the thing because I had a mentor. His name was Richard Minervino. And I don't know, he must have saw something in me when I was a young guy. He probably saw him as a young guy, right? Just a guy trying to figure it out and make it. And he was worth $350 million at the time. And he used to invite me to his office and I'd sit down and we'd have discussions on life and business. And I remember him saying to me one day, he goes, Doug, how many pair of shoes can you actually wear at one time? Right? He's like, how many cars can you drive? How many houses do you actually need to live in? And he's like, I could retire right now and never work a day of my life. But he said, you'll find me the first person in here and the last person to leave, and you will find me deceased in this chair because this is what I love to do.
Yeah.
And it reconnected me with my dad used to tell me, he's like, you're going to work at something, so you might as well work at something you like to do. And I think we all kind of get out of that because we get stuck with the financial pressures or whatever happens, maybe marital issues have happened. You know, I had that happen in my life at one time, right? So, you know, so we sort of go awry, but then we kind of get away from that true, what you, I think, call the soul of the business, and what people, we start to disconnect so much from who we truly are that we want to get back to that core. And as soon as that man got back to that core on the 60 million, he was happy as could be. And he just like, listen, I got more money than I need. So
How much is enough?
you know,
Yeah,
exactly.
What the idea, when I started my business, I had a fairly clear definition in my mind about what success looked like. And part of it was monetary. There was a fiscal component to it, but it was really dominated by, the mission of the work. Yeah. I'm an educator. I love to educate. I love to teach. And, that's, if I'm not doing that, I mean, Bob Proctor is an example. Bob was a dear, dear friend. I knew Bob for years and years. He was at our wedding. I mean, I spoke at his memorial service. He was 87, and I mean, literally, up until about 3 days before he passed, he was teaching. I mean, and he didn't do it for the money. Bob gave more stuff away. He just loved to teach, and his business was wildly successful. And he stumbled on a secret, and there's no pun intended there, because he was a star in the movie The Secret, but there was no pun intended. He and I had conversations about this. Nature for me is one of the greatest teachers I've ever encountered. And there's nothing in nature that serves as a center of accumulation. Everything in nature serves as a center of distribution in some way, shape, or form. Yes. And if I lose connection to the fact that I'm a center of distribution, I start to, the spirit of who I am starts to atrophy. And I was struck by what you said about, when you, kind of recalibrated, you actually started making more money.
Yeah.
And the idea of going from 200 million to 65 million, you look at it just from a ratio standpoint, it's kind of like, oh my God, we're dying. But growth at all costs is not healthy. It's just not a healthy way to live a life. And what's enough?
Well, I think we can see evidence of that amongst people who have had huge kingdoms and toppled themselves, in that process. And
the ego.
I think the Greek. Yeah. I think the Greeks called it hubris. I think I remember that word hubris from school years ago. Yeah. And I learned a lesson from Oprah Winfrey, by the way, who I love as a teacher. And she basically, the lesson was this: when you connect your true self and you bring significance to that in serving other people in a significant way, you will always make money. And I learned this early on in my life, Blaine. I used to hang around with a gentleman when I was in the military. Tom was in Vietnam. We used to call him Vietnam Tom. I don't know why. That was just his nickname, right? And he once said to me, because I was in a sales job and he was selling too. And he once said to me, he said, "Doug, making money is not hard. You just got to do something." And he said, "You just be consistent at doing that and you'll make money." And I was like, wow, how brilliant, right? I mean, I don't know what I was, 19 or something at the time, right? And he was so clear on this point. But what he was basically selling me at that point was, just take action on something and you'll make money. So the question then I said, when I heard Oprah say that, is I was like, okay, so if I'm truly myself, like I'm the guy right now that if you meet me at a party or you meet me at dinner or you meet me over the phone, I'm this guy. Like I just don't come off that. Being your true self and then bringing that significance or that soul, if you will, the mission to it. It's a formula that works, but you've got to do what Tom said, is to take action. And that's what I find a lot of people, Blaine, don't do.
Yeah. Got to do the do. Got to do the do.
Yeah. Do the do. Hey, I hope I can take that and coin that phrase, because I mean, even Bob Proctor still lives on, right? I mean, I just talked to somebody who was was a Bob Proctor, consultant or whatever they were, going, a certified person. So, it lives on past his life as we knew him here. And
Yeah.
Even when I'm teaching people, how to be think and act and be as a 1% earner, the first place we begin is, what do you really truly want?
Yeah. Yeah.
And we get so crystal clear on what they truly want. And I know for people in a business context, they might go, why would you do that? For that same reason that gentleman had the $200 million company, was unhappy, and at 60 million, he was blissful. Right. And I've had the pleasure of working literally with tens of thousands of businesses over my life, through group and one-on-one and, other training type of methods. And the one thing that I can say with certainty is, when we're in a place where we're just driven on that drive of what we truly want, and we're clear on that, we learn what to say no to.
Yeah.
And I think that's what gets people into challenge mode. It's kind of like, it's like, I don't know, bad analogy, but when I was in the military, you'd be in the field for, I don't know, 3 months, right? You'd come out of there, and if you're single, the first thing you want, right? You want to go find some gal to sort of go out with and just feel like a person again, right?
Mm-hmm.
And but what if 50 of them say yes? Like, should I truly be going out with all 50? Probably not, right? Should I be making decisions based on all of that? No, I probably shouldn't. And the reality is that we never, most human beings, I have found through their life, lose what they truly want. They know it when they're younger. And then through habituation of conforming to society, whether it's, mom, dad, preacher, teacher, brother, sister, I don't know, as guru, whatever, right? We buy into what society says we should be doing. We sort of lose that.
Yeah.
And that's, Blaine, like with the 1%, you and I were talking before, like, I have a really big concern now. And I feel like I've reconnected with mission more than I ever have, now going into my 60s. And, because I have a really big concern. I have daughters who are 22, 23, and I see what their friends are going through. But there are people in their 30s who, in 40s, who are in a job they don't want to be in. But, they've got 3 kids, they've got the house. Yeah. The handcuffs, right? I mean, I remember that. I mean, I was making, I think it was 160,000 a year or something at that point. I had two children, and I was in a corporate job, and I really didn't like going in every day. I was just like, in fact, I coined it the invisible prison.
Yeah.
And, and I remember I was going to be going out on my own, because I was like, okay, I'm just going to break the invisible prison. And my spouse wasn't working at the time. She's taking care of the kids. They were just in diapers. And I was like, oh, what a risk. Right. So I threw $60,000 up, and we lost the $60,000 in the first 4 months. And I'm sitting there, and I'm still like, now I'm at this company trying to do this job part-time, my job full-time, but doing my business full-time. And we lost money. And then the CEO of the company comes up to me, and he says, I want to offer you an upgraded position. It's $450,000 a year. And I was like, no, don't say those words. No, because, right. And I possibly would have had to move to Los Angeles to get it. And I would live in New England at the time. And I don't like winter, so it was even more inviting, because I'm like, oh my gosh, I get to go to the sunny weather. But in my head and in my soul, I was thinking, if I take this job, I'm stuck. I'm not coming out of this, right?
Yeah.
So I turned it down, which was a good thing, which led me onto the path, right, of doing what I'm doing. Yeah. But I want to help those people who are in that position. And I want to help people who are, in the 50-something up bracket, they're kind of at that place where they're looking at, okay, I want to retire sometime, but they're looking at their savings account. They're looking at their 401ks, if they have one. They're looking at all of these things, and they're going, I can't do it. You know what I mean? I'm going to have to work till I'm 70 or 75. And the crazy part about it is, if they learn how to think and act like a 1% earner, they don't have to make 1% income. You know what I mean? Yeah. Not everybody wants to make that.
Right.
But if we could teach somebody to make an extra 6 figures, a year, that's the difference between them in retirement, let's say, having a quality of life that they want versus having a quality of life that they have to comply to because of the financial pressures. And if we could teach somebody who's in a sales position to add another 6 figures to their income, or, add more to their income, and they like being at a job, that gives them the ability to be able to have different decisions down the line. They have savings and send the kids to private school, whatever they want. But those people who want to get out of that corporate job, there's also a way of doing that. And that's what I did. And, I lost 60 grand the first time, so they don't have to. But, I did. When I left that company, it took me 15 months, but I drove my business to $998,600
Round numbers,
in a year. Oh, I remember being so upset because I was like, it's almost $1 million. It was like the end. It was the end of the year. And I was like, it was December 30, like the end, 30 of the 31st or whatever the day was. I can't remember how many days are in December now. But I remember going, who can I call to get a $1,500 sale so I can push this over $1 million? Just like driving at it. And I called everybody. And of course it was like, hey, we're focused on, the holiday and, going into the new year, and come see me in a month and all that. So we never made it there, but, but that set me up, to be able to set a foothold, which actually led me on my path to, be with Chet Holmes and be with Tony Robbins and Russ Whitney and all the, great people I've been able to work with, and all the big companies and things like that. So if I had never made that decision based on truly what I wanted, then it wouldn't have taken me down that path. I would have taken that $450,000 a year job, and hey, wouldn't have been back, back in the 80s, making $450,000 a year was no small,
small
shame
thing
by any means,
What I really enjoy about what you're referencing here is, in my experience, more people are far more clear about what they don't want than what they do want.
Yeah.
And that gets them in a whole world of hurt. What I don't want is the experience of being at risk. What I don't want is the experience of fiscal insecurity. So when a $450,000 offer comes down the road, they jump at it because they don't want what it seemingly is addressing, and they miss what they do want, what they love. So we're going to take a real quick break here, and when we come back, I want to dive into this whole notion of the top 1%, just kind of how you work with people to set some stuff up, regardless of where they are circumstantially in their life right now, because you've got some phenomenal ways that you actually position people to actually begin to not only think differently, but to do differently.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we'll take a real quick break. We're talking to Doug Brown right now, CEO of CEO Sales Strategies, and we're going to be talking about the 1% Academy when we come back from this little short break. The nature of life is evidenced in nature. Nature grows, and all of nature honors the desire to be more, to have more, and to do more. Life thrives when it's allowed to grow. And ideally, thriving is what we also, all of us, want to be able to do. Unfortunately, at some stage in life, most people find themselves settling into what I can only call a rut. And a rut is nothing more than a coffin with the ends kicked out. You want to quickly get out of any rut that you find yourself in. When you stop growing, that's when the coffin starts to appear. The simple truth is this, and this is true for everything in nature. You're going to die. I'm going to die. Every one of us dies. So the question we need to come to grips with is not, are we going to die? The question nature asks us to answer is, are we truly living? That's what motivation is about. It's the desire to move. It's the desire to grow and to excel. Have I lived? How have I lived? I'd love for you to take advantage of my Leadership Mindset Masterclass. It's all about providing you with the tools to ensure thriving for yourself and for those around you. Register today to receive the free introduction video and find out more about this acclaimed program. You'll also receive a copy of my international #1 bestseller, Compassionate Capitalism, A Journey to the Soul of Business. I'm Blaine Bartlett, and I look forward to helping you thrive. Welcome back, folks. And I want to pick up where we left off with Doug. The Top 1% Academy. Two things here. What compelled you to start it? And how do you actually, what's, not only how, what compelled you to start it, but what's the target, the mission of the Top 1% Academy?
I'll start with the second question first, because it's, I think, a lot easier for me to answer. The mission really is to help people to have the confidence that no matter what's going on in, their job, if they're working one, a business if they have it, the economy, the presidential election that's coming up, no matter what happens in the world, that the one thing I've always known, Blaine, as selling, and I learned this actually at the age of 5.5, is if we know how to be able to sell, we create leverage. Mm-hmm. And if we have leverage in our life, we were always going to be okay, right? That was kind of the driving force behind that. I started this because of that reason, where I'm talking to so many people, and I still do. I mean, I still help companies build sales teams that are talking to people on a daily basis, and I'm listening to what people are saying, and looking at what's going on in the world, and I'm listening to the kids who are coming up, and I call them kids now because they're in their 20s, right? And I'm 60, so it's kind of like, I don't mean that condescending, but I look at a 20-year-old now and I go, wow, I was once 20, and it wasn't that long ago, right? I mean, like, what was I thinking back then? And then I go back to that moment. I'm like, well, it was a lot what they're thinking, except I think they have it rougher than I did because of the stuff that's going on in the world, right? And now I'm starting to sound more like probably my grandfather did, back when I was his, my age. But
yep.
I started this because it was something Richard Minervino said to me. He owned the Minervino companies. This was down in Connecticut. Mm-hmm. And one day I was in his office and he said, I was looking, he had all of these like checks he got from consulting, because he was like a telecommunications consultant in the late 50s, which didn't exist, really at that point, right? He was kind of like the forerunner. And I'm looking and I'm seeing $1 million checks from like the Hartford Mutual Insurance Company. He's got them kind of like framed and plaqued on his wall, on his desks and stuff. And I'm looking at all these checks and I'm going, wow, 1958, getting $1 million or whatever, that was a lot of money back then. And, he had like 10 clients at a time, and they were all huge companies. And I said to him, I said, geez, this is impressive, And he said, not as impressive as that document on the wall. And he pointed, and I looked, and he said, the document said, if you can help one person live a better life, you've lived a life of significance.
Mm. Yeah.
And I said, wow. He looked at me and he said, look, I got all these years in business. You can see, there were 315 people out on the floor working for him at this moment, and others working around the world. And he said, Doug, I've been able to coach people and help them grow from one place to another place to another place in their life. And I've been able to create significant differences in their life because I created this company. He said, son, that is a worthwhile goal. And so that's really why I, came back to this, because, I'm at a place now where, everything's paid off. I don't have financial considerations. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to help people to go from point A to point B, and then from point B to point C, depending on what they truly want. And it's a process, Blaine. And if people follow the process like anything, it works. And I've tested it over and over, through decades. So
yeah,
I know it works.
That's beautiful. Where can people find out more about what you're up to, Doug? And if they were interested in, taking advantage of the academy? How would they go about availing?
Yeah. So the academy is not going to officially begin until probably the fourth quarter of this year.
Okay.
So I've got a waiting list that we're putting together. I I wrote an ebook, and Blaine, if it's okay with you, I'd like to give it away to your audience. I mean, we are going to sell it, but we just got it back actually today. So if it's all right with you, your folks here who are listening to this can go to www.ceosalesstrategies plural.com and then /1PE. So one Paul Edward, right? So 1% ebook, basically. And I wrote yeah. I said to my marketing people, I said, can we make this longer? They're like, no, people will remember 1PE. So, because I wanted 1% Academy, something, ebook or whatever. So I wrote this book on what is a 1%er? How do they think? What's the philosophy, the psychology? How did I kind of learn this, right? And how can they be in that category too, if they want to be? So that would be a good place to start. They can enter their name and email information, and we'll update them as they go along. They can certainly send an email to us at YouMatter, YOUMATTER, at ceosalesstrategies.com, and either myself or one of my staff members will respond to them for sure. But if they're interested in it, it's doable. I've taken people with no sales experience whatsoever, and they're making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, even currently today, off what I've done. I have, one guy who went from 140,000 in commissions to 2.1 million in his first year, taking that. So, some people are seasoned in selling, some people are not. I've had accountants, people go, oh, I'm too methodical to sell. I'm like, not any more than an accountant or an engineer, right? I mean, that's, biochemist, right? So, it's not really about, a lot of it is what we're talking about, Blaine. I mean, much of it is how do we take that internal guidance system and how do we adjust that so that we are thinking and acting in that way.
Yep.
And getting clear on what that target is. For some people, I've had them, I've run a couple test pilot runs on this. So just to make sure that, all the success I had before wasn't like, okay, well, that was a fluke and it can't be replicated. And, but some people are like, listen, I just want to make an extra $45,000 a year so my wife doesn't go have to work a second job. And it's like, okay, that's easy enough, right? And then I've had other people come and say, I want to make $3 million a year net. Okay, well, you can do that too. The one thing I learned working with Tony Robbins and working with Chet Holmes is, and especially Russ Whitney, you can do whatever you want as long as you're committed to doing it.
Yeah.
And that commitment doesn't mean it's easy.
No.
But,
but if you love it, the effort is effortless.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, so the Academy runs 24 months, just so people are aware if they're interested in it. We make it super cost effective for them to do this. We even break it up over the 24 months for them. So we also do deal analysis for them, Blaine. So like, let's say that they are selling and they're like, man, I'm going to go talk to the CEO of this company or the owner of this company, or I've got 4 people who are going to be in this meeting. How do we structure and strategize this so that, we can walk out, with the higher percentage of a closed deal. So, we do things like that. It's not for the faint hearted. I will tell everybody that, Blaine, because it's truly, we are showing up, we're getting down to business. We are, all nice people working together. But the reality is, we call you out on your stuff if you don't do it. So just be aware of that.
Accountability makes the world go round. It truly does.
Yes, sir.
Folks, we've been listening to Doug Brown at CEO Sales Strategies. The URL for the ebook, and thank you very much for making that available. I'll put that up in the show notes so people will have easy access to it. And we will catch you on the next iteration of this. I want to thank you, Doug. This has been a fascinating conversation. I love what you're up to. And more than anything else, I just really appreciate your heart. Yeah. I mean, it certainly comes through in everything that you're talking about. So, yeah, thank you for that.
You're welcome, Blaine. And thank you so much. Again, I'm very grateful to be here.
My pleasure, my friend.